Hey y'all, good morning. Good morning. I can't tell you how excited I am to see so many people here. For those of you I have not met, and there's a lot of faces I haven't met, I'm Farrah Foster, and it's my honor to be the Grand Steward of the museum for hopefully the foreseeable future. And I would like to introduce, this is Jessie Walsh. She's our exhibits and
events,
thank you, coordinator, and we've been doing this little historical type presentation for 6 months now. And this has been, of the ones we've done thus far, no, not even close our favorite. And I think it's because so much information has come out organically, and the character of this gentleman has just begun to shine through, even though he left this life 6 months after I came into it. So it's just been a real pleasure and an honor, and I just want to thank you all for being here. We have a couple of guests who are family members of Mr. Finken, and Dr. Scott Carley has been so gracious with information and sharing. And Walter Carley is here, Ed Carley is here, so we're just thrilled to have you all here. I also would like to introduce, even though they're on the back row, you'll get to meet them later, Raven Dirge and Avery Rudolph from Pinnacle Fine Art Restoration. And thanks to Beth Earlywine, when we did our presentation in here in November, the Finken mural that got us interested in him as a person and him as an artist was on display in here just a few weeks before Raven and Avery started the restoration of that mural. So, because Beth said specifically, I want to know about that, we find ourselves here. So with that, I will turn it over to Jessie, and again, just thank you all so much.
Howdy. Let's see. We've got a microphone this time, and we'll just see how well it does. There we go. It's on. So, we know already that a lot of you knew Mr. Finken in life, but we'd kind of like to see a show of hands, if you don't mind, about how many of you knew him personally. All right. Yes. Some of you, we know the connection. Well, anyway, those of you who know of him or knew him know that he was born and that he grew up in Germany. He was born in 1883 in October of that year, and his parents were Wilhelm and Anita Finken. And this is where he was born, where he grew up. That is, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Chantal? No?
Chantal.
Yeah. And that was nestled between Aachen and the border of Holland. So anyway, he was one of 7 sons, and as you can imagine, with a family that size, you want to get your groceries as affordably as you can. So what they would do to get those groceries as affordably as possible is they would have Pete go out with a wheelbarrow, and he would go across the border to get groceries where they were a bit cheaper. And so this gave him a lot of opportunity to walk through the countryside and observe all this beautiful nature around him. And I imagine a lot of time to just think, And so that trip was an hour each way, or about an hour each way. So that does add up to a lot of time. And there's kind of a map that will show you where it was nestled in. There's Aachen down there. And then this is him as a young man. In his early teens, he had an opportunity to start visiting art galleries across Germany, from Aachen to Dresden, and those experiences gave him a great appreciation of the old masters. And so he did what many artists do even today. Whenever you are starting out, especially, you practice what you admire. You practice and copy what you admire. And so he started off copying his heroes. And so to my knowledge, he was entirely self-taught. Is that right, according to what
That's my understanding.
That's what I thought. I didn't see anything about him taking lessons from somebody in particular. And Pete's father, Pete's father really just wanted what was best for him, and he was a very practical, pragmatic man. So he encouraged Pete to follow kind of a more reliable, more practical path. And, Pete wanted to follow his father's wishes, that was important to him. And so he studied mechanical engineering in Aachen. And he also took an apprenticeship at the steel mill. And so he basically studied by night and worked by day, had a very busy schedule, but he still found time to, just any chance he got, to visit the galleries and continue painting, just whenever he had time. And he came to America, he was 24 when he came to America. It was 1907, and he made the decision to leave. Even all those years before the First World War, he could see the path that the country was headed down. And he later said of his decision to leave, the Lord blessed me, I saw smoke in the skies. And so to get here, he applied for a passport that would allow him to study the steel industry in Pittsburgh. But as far as I can tell, he never even set foot in Pittsburgh, or certainly didn't stay very long. He got here through New York and just kind of kept on traveling. Didn't stop really until he got to the depot in Little Rock. And it was a long journey by train, as you can imagine. And I'm sure it felt especially long, considering that, bless him, it was July, and he was in a full dress suit, even a big frock coat. And so he just sat there, sweating, and by the sound of it, just unflinching in his sense of propriety, that he wasn't gonna start undressing, even though all of these American passengers that were with him started taking off their shoes and undressing right down to the undershirt. But he just sat there and sweated it out. And so he came to Arkansas. It wasn't an accident that he came here. He wanted to come here. He was very, let's see, we'll get there. He was inspired by The Bear State, the book that Theodore Roosevelt wrote. And it wasn't quite what he imagined, or not as the book had described. He kind of thought from the sound of the book that it would be a bit of a wild land, because Theodore Roosevelt had claimed that Arkansas only had one newspaper and one mail delivery a week. But what he found when he got here were, buildings with ceiling fans that he hadn't really seen before, and other modernities. So it didn't quite, line up with what he thought it was going to be, but he liked it. And yeah, that's what I'm saying. During that journey from New York to Arkansas and all those, he became acquainted with a man who worked for the railroad, what would become the Missouri Pacific Railroad. And I don't know what all was said in this conversation, but by the end of it, Pete had a job lined up. And in this job, he became superintendent over a 20-man crew building locomotives. And he worked for that company for 15 years, during which time he met his wife, Clara Keller, who was from Pine Bluff, and she also had family here in Stuttgart. And that was including a brother named Bill. And in 1922, the end of those 15 years, was the Great Railroad Strike. And so, during that long strike, Pete decided it was time to move on, to find other work. And I think our community kind of owes a big thank you to Bill Keller, because he was the one that really urged them to come to Stuttgart. And they had visited, the area a few times at least. So they kind of knew the area, and they, obviously had family here. And really, this was a time where there was a lot of recent expansion in the area. New businesses cropping up. The rice industry was chugging along pretty good at this point. Population growth. So I think that Pete saw a lot of opportunity here. And also, I think he saw inspiration here too from his visits. I read that one thing that caught his attention that kind of captured his imagination was the huge flocks of ducks that go over every year. And I wonder, if there was something about the Grand Prairie that kind of in some way reminded him, although I think that area in Germany is a bit more mountainy, not as flat as out here. But, you wonder if he was reminded of those long walks and through nature, and just, he always appreciated that. And this is, when they came here, this was their first house. So many of these pictures that I'm using today were sent to me by Dr. Carly, and I'm so glad for them. They make this presentation so much better. But anyway, so here they came. And being a skilled engineer, the smart guy that he was, it looks like Pete was really able to transition from railroad engineering to irrigation without too much trouble. And that was really something that we noticed about him as we've read about him, was that everything he did, he gave it his all. He really just would dive in and put in the work. So he ended up working for Fairbanks and Morse here in town as a pump machinist, and he did that for 25 years. And just as he did as a young man, he still found time to paint when he could. And it was whenever he retired, and there's a picture of him. It was when he retired in 1949 that he was finally free to give his full attention to art. More attention than he, I think, ever really had been before, because he got more time on your hands. And it was the words of his wife, Clara, that played a significant part in inspiring him to get started on just spending more time on that. She said, "Why don't you always paint that picture that you're always talking about?" And I believe that was in reference to sorrow, given the context of my research. So he set out to create that painting, and this is just a section of it. He set out to create that painting, but stopped when Clara passed away shortly after in 1950. And he would return to the painting from time to time, in between doing these other paintings for his Clue to Life Eternal series. And he finally did complete this in 1956. And I can really imagine, as I read Pete's own account of coming back to sorrow over and over again, I can imagine him processing his grief through that project. And in his account, he said, this painting, this was part of the pamphlet that we've got here on the table. That's the final quote. But he also said, this painting is to show that sorrow and grief experienced by your neighbor are as great, if not greater, than your own. And so, seeing that and then compare with that knowledge in mind, looking at the other paintings he was doing in that project, you can imagine him processing his own feelings and moving forward. And we know that his faith was so important to him. It's just clear that, from his boyhood in Germany all the way to his later years, he was deeply dedicated to his faith. And that view on life gave him his appreciation of nature as well. I think that shines through in his Clue of Life Eternal series as well. The landscapes and the backgrounds of these paintings get just as much attention to detail as the subjects. And I've got a few of those for you. Some of them, most of them you'll recognize, I think, the folks here. So this is First Christian. It's just kind of the layout for those who haven't been inside that sanctuary before. But I've also got close-ups. We have here The Good Shepherd, which was done in 1942, and Christ's Ascension, done in 43. And then in the Fellowship Hall, we've got what's called the Christian Era. And this was done a bit later in 53. Do I have a detail shot? Yes, I did. I wanted to get a close-up of some of those waves. They're just beautiful. Yeah, there's so many. I have a lot of photos on that camera roll that I was trying to get good details of. And then over here, this is at First United Methodist, just down the road. And I think of all the ones that I've seen thus far, at least the ones I've seen in person, this might be my favorite from the series. That's just kind of an aside, but you know, really, I can see it as a place to go and just be with your thoughts, and really captures the essence of the scene that's playing out here, you know. And so, and there's the other one on the flip side of Getsman. In my research, I found a list of artists that were named as some of Pete's heroes from his visits to other to art galleries. So I decided to take a quick look around the internet and see if I could pick out some works that looked like they were an inspiration to Pete, or had that kind of the footprint of him copying people's works that he admired. And so here's one artist, Albert Dürer. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that well. And so you can see both faith-based and nature-based artwork, as well as Anthony van Dyck. And then, of course, Leonardo da Vinci. And I think that, you know, it makes perfect sense, really, that Da Vinci would be one of his heroes, because they both had minds that were gifted artistically as well as, you know, scientifically, mechanically. Pete used his creative talent and engineering mind to make things other than paintings from time to time. And so, for example, he designed some of the parade floats for the Rice Carnival, which we actually now have a picture of to show you if you guys want to take a closer look later. I was excited to see that. And he also designed the scepter for the first Queen Mallard competition, which we have on display here. But as we've already seen that as an artist, he was just incredibly well-rounded. He didn't just do landscapes. He didn't just do portraits. He did it all. And he even illustrated quite a few covers for the Grand Prairie Historical Bulletin. He was one of the founding members of the Historical Society. And he also painted stage scenes and backdrops, including one that we've heard, and someone correct me if we're wrong here, but we've heard that it's still in use now, St. John's Easter sunrise service backdrop. And we've got, let's see, there's that picture of it. This is kind of where our new mural comes back into play. When we were given this amazing piece, it came to us directly from the American Legion Hall just down the road. And it had been there for a number of years, and before that, it had been in the old American Legion Hall for many, many years. The big mystery was it originally painted for the old American Legion Hall, or did it come, you know, from somewhere else? As we were discussing it in November, the two main theories were that it was either done for the old American Legion Hall, or maybe it was in a basement meeting room at the Riceland. Those are the two most popular theories. And it turns out that the answer was really just right under our noses the whole time. As you know, an article about Mr. Finken for the Grand Prairie Historical Bulletin just kind of offhandedly mentions that Pete painted panoramas for the duck calling contest, in addition to these other backdrops. And so anyway, I just heard duck calling contest, and it was sort of a light bulb moment. You know, we started, just how perfect would that be as a backdrop for that particular event? So we started looking through our old contest photos, and, you know, there's more photos. Sure enough, there it was, right behind Pat Peacock and these other gentlemen whose names I cannot recall at the moment. I know some of them, but there it is, right there. And that was the first photo that we saw that I thought, that kind of looks like those ducks line up. But then we found more that show it a little bit better. And this is one of the earlier photos that we found, at least in our collection. This was the earliest one that we knew of, because we knew there's Miss Pat wearing her band uniform, so that would have been 1950, what year did we say?
55.
55, yes. And so we knew that it was at least that old, but we didn't know if it had been around for longer or not, at least not at the time. But then Dr. Carley sent this photo as well, and I'm not sure when this was taken, but it looks a bit older than that. that really shows it nicely. So if you weren't able to see the mural before, you can see it today if you'd like. But there's a sneak peek if you weren't able to see it back in November. So I'm still not sure just how long ago that was painted, but that's kind of the next thing we'd like to find out if we can.
Is that the one being restored?
Yes, yeah, and it's in the Hall of Fame now. And as far as my own piece of this program goes, because we're really excited to, hear your stories and your memories, and if there's any questions or conversation about the restoration project, because it's so exciting, we have, Avery and Raven here to answer questions and talk about that. But for my own piece, I just kind of wanted to say that the through line that I see of Pete's life story is how every move he made was driven by, I'm getting emotional, I didn't know the guy. Every major decision that he made, every move that he made was driven by his kindness and his faith. And when he did something, he gave it his all. And he wanted to share what he had. He was so community minded. And from his involvement with the Historical Society and the founding of the Arts Festival, which we didn't even really get to go into detail about, but that was a huge piece of his legacy. Just from those things to his day-to-day interactions, how many people, even just in this room, did he teach art to or offer to teach art to? We've got a list 10 feet long of what he accomplished and what he brought to this community. To be standing here with people who knew him and whose lives were impacted by him, it just really makes you think about the ripple effect of just one person's life. And I'm getting emotional. It's silly.
Well,
but,
it has really, this topic started out as an interest in a donation to the museum. We really had no idea what gift we were being given. Not just in the value of the mural, but the character of the man. When we discovered that he had been one of the earliest members of the Grand Prairie Historical Society, that he created the art for the bulletins, that he painted the mural that hung behind the first and only woman who won the World Championship duck calling contest when she was rushing from school as a 17-year-old high school senior, and then later became the director of the museum. The way it all ties together, and knowing the long, tremendous legacy he left this community, that's a farming community. Even though we're a community of faith, art was something that he really instilled, and the legacy of the Grand Prairie Arts Festival. It's just, he gave us such a gift by just being him.
Yeah.
And so it's just really been an incredibly emotional experience for both of us.
Just working here, you feel like a tiny, tiny part of the
Even
story.
the relationships that have come because of this research have enriched all of our, our lives tremendously. And we would love to hear from the Carley family and some of you who actually knew him. Obviously, his family is very devoted to him, and he's been gone for a while. So it's a tremendous blessing for us to have you here.
And I had to include this one just because that's his, you called it his selfie from a plane. That's adorable.
Yes, he was 2,000 feet above Stuttgart. Jimmy Oliver was flying the plane. So on the back of the photo it says, a picture of myself flying 2,000 feet over Stuttgart with Jimmy Oliver.
Yeah. Do you want this?
No. I'm Ed Carley. I'll tell one on a grandfather too. Grandmother thought that all this painting and everything was frivolous, and she wouldn't let him spend any money on the art supply or anything of that nature at that time. When she passed away, I think I was about 3 years old. You were probably just brand new. Yeah. Then he really got into it and started doing stuff on his own. I'm fortunate enough, I've got a landscape, and it's signed and dated 1929 that he did in chalk. And the reason he did it in chalk was because he didn't have any other art supplies. Grandmother wouldn't let him have it. He got the chalk from the from the machine shop where they mark steel to cut it. So he had blue, he had black, he had white, a few of those things, and some orange. But it was the chalk from the machine shop that he used to do this landscape. And I'm fortunate enough I've done it in 1929. But it's the story behind it too that she wouldn't let you spend any money on it.
I was just gonna ask, I think there are some other paintings he did in churches in town.
Yes.
Okay.
There were quite a few that I didn't have time to run in and take a photo of, or it didn't work out. But there are so many, and we've got a list here, and I can also make copies of a list of where you can find a lot of them throughout the Grand Prairie. Yeah.
I'd just like to say that, excuse me, Mr. Finken started the Arts Council. His goal was to have an art center. And we finally accomplished that in 1980 by purchasing the buildings to have the art center. And the 67th festival is coming up in 2023. We don't do it all in one session nowadays because the ones of us that are doing it are a little older and our bodies don't hold up like they used to do it for a week-long time. But we do it at the art center 4 times a year, different mediums. So his legacy is still living on.
Yes.
We still are working for Mr. Finken.
I'm Scott Carlin. And,
Yeah, if you
well, and as a
if you want this.
as a part of this, I was 9 years old when he died, and so the only thing I remember 2 things. He was soft spoken, not very tall. The night he died, he showed me his fish that he'd eaten, and he said, "Look, Scotty, I ate all my fish." But I remember him teaching me perspective, how to draw. So like a distant train coming out of a mountain, he would teach me how to draw perspective. As things get closer to you, they get bigger. But as an 8-year-old, I'm still kind of a magical thinker, and that it was something that I remember him telling me to appreciate. One of the things in my research was that he got the DAR Americanism Award, I guess about 1968, right before he died. And as a part of the application, and I have his application in here, it's buried in here a little bit, but as a part of that, they talk about the patriotic things that he had done. So he had worked he registered for the World War I for the United States Army. He had 4 brothers in the German Army, 1 brother-in-law in the United States Army that had went over to Europe to fight against his brothers. He registered for the United States Army, worked for the United States Secret Service, identifying German spies in the United States. He met face-to-face 4 different presidents of the United States. He met Teddy Roosevelt, Calvin Coolidge, Woodrow Wilson, and Taft. Yeah. And he was the first person in Stuttgart when he had his house here to fly an American flag in his front yard. We've got the flag. And he had the first one to have a flagpole because that was listed on his application. In 1914 or 1913, where Camp Robinson is, I guess it was called it Camp Pike back then, but he did a large mural with a razorback and Uncle Sam to raise war bonds for World War I. This was when he lived in Argenta, and just numerous other things that he was so proud of. But he came here when he was young, couldn't speak English, learned how to speak English with a 3rd grade reader. Still had an accent, quite heavy accent. I recall him having one when he died. He spoke English backwards somewhat. That's when my family, my mom said things backwards in English a lot, like toweling paper instead of paper towels and things like that. So we had a little bit of the German English going on. But he loved America. He loved being an American and was very proud of that, and for sure. But and so when he got this award, I think it's about 2 months before he died, I guess. But he was so proud of that, very proud of that.
What year did he die, Scott?
1968.
Okay.
2 months before we got married.
Yeah.
Is that Sarah Parks?
No, Rosa McCuskey.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I've actually got his medal and that sort of thing, but which is pristine. He really never wore it. But and I've got a hat that he bought at Chet Pond's store. He was a little tiny guy. He's 5'3" or 5'4", and not very big person, but a big heart. Never had a driver's license. I've got a little book here which is a lot of happenstance things, but it's a diary he kept. Actually, I got two diaries of his. One, and I'm going to leave this at the museum, and y'all can photocopy it if you want to. And one is that starts. He wrote this in German. It began probably around. He wrote this around 1890 or 1902, maybe 1903. It was all in old German, and so we had that. My dad had it translated back in the early '80s. But it's an interesting story. I mean, he like you said, he grew up in the country somewhat and had different jobs and worked in a coal mine, broke his ribs. He tried to become a Catholic priest in 1899 in Vals, Holland, and he was rejected because he didn't know Scripture well enough, and he was Catholic then. And then he got engaged to a girl named Catherine. And they were to be married. And then she broke the engagement and joined she became a nun.
Yeah.
Then he befriended a so that wasn't enough rejection, I guess. So then he befriended a Lutheran pastor, and then I think that along with some of the impetus that drove him to come to the United States, along with he liked reading. I talked to Zeddy last week a little bit because I didn't know him as well as she did probably. And so she told me the story about how he kicked her out of art school and said that she was fine and she didn't need any more lessons. And she liked that. But all good stories. But so this is a diary and it goes up to the time I think when he moved here, I suppose. And then this is a daily diary. The year the kid got shot, 1963, he lived at the Riceland Hotel. And he would just get up in the morning and, say who I don't know who the Fishers are, but he went to the Fishers' house and watched TV a lot in the evenings. But I'm not sure who that was. But it's kind of fun to read, what an old man does in 1963. That's an artist. And talks about Zeddy Jones coming for art lessons and Carolyn Kinder. I think I know Carolyn. Yeah, she took lessons from my grandfather as well. And is she still alive?
Yes.
In Florida, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a backdrop behind the sodbuster. If you're looking through the window behind the front desk into the West Room, that Nutty painted in 76.
And I took lessons from her, so it's kind of
Me too.
A few lessons when I was 13, although my attention was more towards motorcycles and girls, I guess. But I did go a few times. But it's great to get to know someone that I wish, I'm so proud and humbled that he was my grandfather. And the story that you tell is just beautiful about some of those things. And I remember how shattered our family was, and then reading the newspapers, the community grieving over him dying and being gone. And I brought some of those newspapers too from the Leader back because it talks about him a little bit. It's kind of fun to look back through old newspapers. I like doing that. But thank you so much for having this. It's a wonderful opportunity to honor someone so many years later.
But I thank everybody so much for being here again and just truly blessed by the Holy Spirit.
Wonderful.
Thank you.